Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor. Today's show is part of our Clinicians series. I love these shows because we get to take you into the therapeutic work itself, allowing you to get a sense of and an appreciation for what actually occurs within a therapy session, along with an understanding of various therapeutic techniques, strategies, and the constructs that take place between a therapist and patient. Ideally, these series get to demystify the therapeutic process and provide you with an understanding of how life-changing psychotherapy can be. I'm not only excited about this show being part of our Clinician series, but I'm so happy to have a returning guest, Christine Miles. Christine is an executive coach, thought leader, entrepreneur, recognized world expert in the field of listening differently. She is also the author of the book, What Is It Costing You Not to Listen? The Power of Understanding to Connect, Influence, Solve, and to Sell. For over 25 years, Christine has been helping executives, individuals, and families expand human connections, transforming businesses and lives. Christine has her master's in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and is a founder and CEO of Equipt, which helps organizations apply human skills to drive results and build cultures of empathy. Today's Clinician Series discussion will focus on teaching listening skills and the practical exercises used to help us improve our understanding of and our connection with one another. Christine, welcome back to our podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you here. You know, you talk about listening matters, and you're creating a movement where listening, not speaking, is being recognized as the most important part and the most powerful form of our communication with one another. In your book, What's It Costing You Not to Listen? You're teaching people to listen differently, to transform their personal and their professional lives. We're going to talk later on. You've even got something coming into the school systems this August, which is pretty exciting. We'll talk about that later in the show. But you're looking to transform people's lives. In fact, your book received the Axiom Business Book Award, Silver Award in sales category. Congratulations on that. That's pretty cool.
Thank you. It was very cool. I was very honored to have received that. That it was recognized.
That's a nice award. So as we start today, remind us why listening skills are so crucial in both personal and professional settings.
First of all, let me say this. You said listening skills. And so this is what I want to emphasize because I asked a lot of people over the course of my career, is listening important? And everybody says universally yes. And maybe that's because they don't want to be the person that says no, because it doesn't look good. But we all know it's a big deal. And yet it isn't a skill that we develop. It is something that we expect or assume will happen, even with our kids. Pay attention, listen, you're not listening to me. I told you, but you didn't. So it creates this chasm, a chasm that really breaks very slowly. I call it death by a thousand cuts, with frustration, with erosion of the relationship, with misunderstandings. And both in business and personally, the impact's really the same. When people don't feel understood, then things don't go well, typically. And one of the things I realized early in my coaching career, because I worked as a therapist first, that was my first job for many years. And when I went into businesses, most of the problems were around what people didn't understand in a meeting, in a conversation. And it was really a lot around the misalignment from not having a common way of listening and a process for listening that everybody could adopt. So that's why I started to do this work very intensively and try to create a way for people to adopt the language very simply. So it costs us so much not to listen.
Well, let's talk about that piece too, because to listen, it can actually be seen as costing us something too. If I have to listen, am I going to miss out on you listening to me? Or am I going to get the floor at some point? And so it's a huge thing not to listen. I can't agree more. But sometimes personally, we have to overcome something. Maybe talk a little bit about what's the attitude that we have to have of being a committed, willing listener, and what are some of the things that we typically have to address within ourselves to overcome moving into a really good listening stance?
One is that very rarely do people come to me and say, can you help me be a better listener? What do I hear? Can you help my child? Can you help my spouse? Can you help my boss? Can you help my employees? It's usually outward. And I say that's because we're in a drought of understanding. So if I'm thirsty, it's really hard for me to want to give you my drink because I'm thirsty too. We're in the same boat. So I think that's why we need to solve this problem and start to teach this as a skill very early
Yeah.
because we're all thirsty. And what do they say about hungry people don't make great shoppers? People who are thirsty to be heard and
Yes.
listened to and understood don't make great listeners.
Yeah.
So we need to learn. I call it the gift of understanding.
Yeah.
It is a gift. It's a gift that you give that you may not receive back. So
Yeah.
that's a big part of it. The other thing is, and this is more in the how you do it, believe it or not, when you learn how to listen, you also learn how to get someone to listen better to you.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's not because they're going to do it by osmosis. You have to lead them there.
You're
But the
modeling
tool
something.
that, well, you'll actually use the tools not only get their story, but for them to get yours.
Yeah.
So you can flip it, but a little bit more of an advanced skill, but it is possible. Yeah.
Let's talk about that. Let's do this. Let's jump into this topic. And again, part of our clinician series is I really want our listeners to get a real practical understanding.
Okay.
Walk me through, and our listeners joining us today, on how you orient your audiences to listen in this listening movement, and then take us through maybe what you teach them and how maybe some of the exercises you walk folks through.
So the good news for the clinicians is that clinicians are in the profession are among the best listeners. Many of them aren't trained, and we're certainly not trained in the same way. So I was trained through the Philadelphia Child Guidance Center when it was just the next gen of Salvador Minuchin. That's who
Oh,
trained
yeah.
me. I was 22 years old, one way mirrors. I went into people's homes. I mean, I had no business doing any of it, but these people were amazing, but they never taught me how to listen. They never taught that I was good at it when I showed up. And so excelled even at 22. I stood out because
Yeah.
I went in and I had something different that I had learned early. But nevertheless, just intuitively and because of who we are, we tend to want to listen more than not as clinicians. So that helps. And a lot of what I teach in organizations and parents and in relationships is what clinicians do.
Mm.
I don't know that we all do it all the same way in a way that creates this language. So that's how I think I can help the clinical base in terms of, all right, how do we do this, and then how do we help our clients do it in a similar way? One of the ways you need to know is if you're going to get good at something, you have to do it the same way every time. That's really it's the only way you get better at something, through a process and through doing it the same way every time.
I can't agree with the idea more. If you want to have confidence in something, you have to have competence and mastery first.
Yeah.
And if we reverse engineer that, the way to get competence and mastery is to do right things repeatedly. And
Yeah.
over time, it becomes an ingrained skill from which you get to have then confidence entering into those moments. And you're talking about the very same thing here, right here. You have a whole path for this,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
walk people through. Walk us through that so our listeners can get an appreciation for what you do.
So the metaphor is because we learn in stories, right? So when we have a story, we're just going to remember it more. And the story is you wouldn't go hiking in the woods for 2 weeks. Like, go out and go in unprepared. That would be crazy. We would take food, we'd take a tent, we'd take supplies. I would, if I had the option. And that's what we're doing when we go into the conversational woods. We go in unprepared all the time.
Mm.
We're totally ill prepared to really navigate the trail, the path. And there's a lot of side trails in the woods, and there's a lot of places to get lost. And conversations metaphorically are the same. There are so many side trails. You talked about what goes on within us. We have our triggers, we have our buttons, we have our biases. That our brains are the greatest enemy of our listening. And so we need tools to calm the subconscious brain so that we can stay on the main path. The other thing is that you're the guide in the conversation as the listener. So we're terrible storytellers, notoriously. We know this as clinicians. People tend to start in the middle of the movie, as I like to say. They come in
Yeah.
and they just drop the problem. This is true in business. This is true with kids. This is true in relationships.
Yeah.
And our job is to organize the speaker to tell us their story in a way we can understand. And so we need tools to be able to do that and to navigate the path to understanding, which is what the listening path is. It's the path to understanding. How do we together navigate the trail? I'm going to be the guide as the listener. I'm going to help you tell your story in a way that I can understand so that we can do something very different, which is discover something, discover the meaning of what's said, not just and the undercurrent and the insight rather than just what's on the surface.
I love the way you're reframing this. Oftentimes we think as listeners, we're going to lose control and we're going to become lost in the process. And you're reframing something here. You're saying that as listeners, we actually, with the skills that you're teaching, get to be the guides that actually organize the speaker and almost kind of shepherd them through a
Yes.
process of telling things in such a way that the meaning gets understood and extracted, but the listener's responsible and able to help shape that process. That's a really cool reframe because we think, oh, I'm going to lose this and I'm not going to be heard. No, 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 no. It's the opposite.
It's the opposite. And it's also that, at times of the essence, sometimes a lot of people say, I don't have this kind of time to listen.
Right.
Well, listening is often thought of as I got to pay attention to you. That's active listening is the way people frame it up, right? If I pay attention, but then I'm just silent while you're talking. And we all know silence sucks the truth out. So when you're just silent, people will go, but that doesn't mean they're going in an organized way.
Right.
So do you ever tell somebody to tell you a joke and they're like, hold on, I started that wrong. And, they know there's an order, but they don't know how to follow it. When we're talking about things that matter to us, whether it's our day or something that happened, we don't know that we're supposed to organize it because we're terrible storytellers and we don't have a framework for that either. So that's where the listening is you said shepherding. We are guiding that person through the trail on the path and making sure they don't get off on all these side routes.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Americans are increasingly concerned about mental health, with nearly 9 in 10 voters seeing it as a crisis. Mental Health First Aid provides crucial training to identify, understand, and respond to mental health and substance use challenges. Gain the skills and confidence to offer life-saving assistance. We offer courses for individuals, groups, and organizations of all sizes, including specialized training for veterans, law enforcement, EMS, and educators. Visit mentalhealthfirstaid.org or email hello@mentalhealthfirstaid.org to schedule your training and make a difference in your community.
Well, that's another cool piece right here. Silence does not equal listening.
Mm-mm.
It doesn't. We need to organize the listening process. And as
Right.
listeners, kind of active listening idea, we say, well, just be active and nod. It's more active than that. Let's talk about maybe some practical exercises that you use that can actually help shepherd a process that maybe most people don't know they have access to. What's it look like?
Yeah. So imagine you go in the woods
Yeah.
and somebody says, we got to get to the peak. And you go, okay, well, how are we going to get there? Well, I have no idea. So where should we start? Well, I have no idea. So this is again what we're doing all day long. So how we teach it, practically what I've learned is that listening is like air, fog. Let's say fog. People see it, they know it's important, but they go to grab it and they're like, I don't know how to, I can't catch it. I
Mm,
can't get my arms around it. It feels so esoteric. And so
yeah.
we needed to make it very tangible. Again, the story helps. And then I created a game so that we can teach these skills by kinesthetic ways. We learn best by doing, as we all know. I used to be a field hockey player. I remember one time I went into an organization and I said, how do people like to learn? Do you like to watch? Do you like to do it? Watch, then do it. And so I tried to show them a field hockey move. Most people don't know how to play field hockey, so it was pretty safe. And everybody wanted to grab the stick and they wanted to learn how to do the move. It's like they don't want to see it. Show me, give me it, put it in my hands and let me
That's
do it.
right. Let me
So
practice.
we put listening in people's hands. Now, we don't sell the game yet. This is by facilitated workshop. We will sell the game eventually to both kids and adults. But this really helps the tangibility. And so there's 12 total tools on the listening path for adults because it's every form of communication. And let me make this point too, because I think there has to be something in it for the listener because it's a gift of understanding. So listening to understand, which is what I mean by how we listen, is what you have to do first, but it earns you the right to do all the other things you actually want to do,
Mhm.
which is tell people what to do, sell to them if you're in the business, tell your wife or husband the advice you want to give them, help them understand why they shouldn't text and drive if it's your kid. But we tend to jump into that right away and expect people to listen. And if telling worked, we'd be in a much better place. But people don't like to be told what to do.
No.
It's human nature. We therapists know this all the time. People used to come into my office. I go, how do you want me to help? I want you to tell me what to do and how do I fix this? And I go, wow, great. There we go. Resistance, resistance, resistance. So
Yeah.
we're in a paradigm that doesn't work. So listening to understand earns you the right to do all the other things that as the listener, you can't wait to do. but you
That's
have to
really
do that
good.
first. So the 5 foundational tools are all based on what you need in your backpack in the woods. So think about you're in the trail. What do you need first? You need a map. Where are we going? If I don't have a map and there's no markers on the trail, I'm not going to find the peak. So on the map, and this is important too, that when you're listening, you're always listening to a story. So when I talk about the listening path, it's the story path. And why do I say that? Well, I don't always get a story. You get one sentence, one word, it's a story. You just don't. You
Yes.
have to unveil it. I had a bad day. That's a story. I just wrecked my car. That's a story.
It's
I
almost
just
like
met
that's the headline on a newspaper. And it's right there for you to kind of write as a journalist what it is about that day that I had a hard day. Such your headline.
That's right. And journalists that's the other really great listeners. And journalists and therapists are story gatherers, as we call them. They go out, they seek to gather the story to understand something so they can tell it, right?
Yes.
Therapists are trying to uncover what's actually happened with an individual or a family so that they can help them solve the problem. So we're salespeople. We have to gather that story. So one word, one sentence, one paragraph, you're in a story. So the map, there's 2 parts of the story. There's facts and there's feelings. There's 2 parts of a narrative in every story. So facts help us understand what's going on. The feelings help us understand the character or the people in the story. So I always say a story without feelings is a PowerPoint, and we all know how we feel about that when we sit down. And a story without facts is a 4-year-old coming in after they sell a movie crying incoherently and they don't tell you anything that's going on. Either one is very disorienting, so you need to get both.
Really.
So now we know what we're looking for on the trail. The next tool is the second tool. It's called the 4 stops. I notice if you know anything about storytelling, the tools for telling a story are similar to the tools for gathering a story. So there's different ways to tell stories, but the hero's journey will tell you there's 4 parts: a beginning, a struggle, a tipping point, and an ending, or what we call a new beginning, because we believe stories evolve. And you need to get those 4 stops. And guess where most people start?
Yeah.
In the struggle.
You bet.
They start with the problem. But we think it's the beginning of the movie, not the end of it, not the middle of the movie. We think we're looking at the beginning. So we don't even know we're confused when we get started. And most people go forward instead of backwards to figure it out. And they miss the beginning of the movie.
What's the beginning look like? Is it kind of the backstory? Is it the lead up to before we get to the actual struggle itself? How do you kind of query around? Give me the beginning.
So, perfect question. So now I'm going to take you back into the woods. So now there's a map and there's facts and feelings. There's 4 stops that I have to get to see the summit, right? Well, how do I get there? There's all these side trails. And we know that part of good listening is asking good questions, being curious, and empathizing. What we don't know is how to do that.
Okay.
So we call this the compass. How do I point me and the speaker in the right direction so that they can tell me the story in a way that I understand? And great journalists and therapists use all of these or some of these. Ready?
Okay.
First one is take me back to the beginning. Very simple.
I like it.
My assistant asked her son that the other day because he came in the middle of the movie. She said, "Hold on, I'm confused. Take me back to the
Right.
beginning." He said, "Like the listening path." And I said,
There you go. It's working.
"It's working."
It's sticking.
The second one is, how did that make you feel? Now, fact, feeling, right? I got both already. There's 2 parts of the narrative. So when you ask these 5, 6 questions, you'll always get both parts of the narrative. Then what happened or what happened next? Tell me more. Very
Yes.
powerful question that most of
Yes.
us hear about, but we don't use it very often. Any therapist that's listening knows that they say that about 40 times a day and they don't even know they say it.
That's right. They're
But we're-
acknowledging something.
We're almost in an imperceptible way encouraging more. Tell me
Yeah.
more with who.
That's
And
it.
last but not least is it sounds like you felt. So you could fill in the emotion. I've learned, I was reading Brene Brown's book, the Atlas of the Heart, and she interviewed 7,000 people that only knew 3 emotions. It's really important we name people's emotions so that we can
Yeah.
help them understand there's more than 3.
Just a quick note on that. Guys typically think, well, there's even 3 for some guys is kind of pushing the envelope. Most guys are I'm either happy or angry. And it's almost like, well, there are other emotions. What might those be? And so as you're talking about as a listener, you're kind of expanding maybe their repertoire, recognizing
Yes.
You know what? That actually is what I'm feeling. I wouldn't have named it that way, but you captured something for me. And what you said earlier, I really like too. When you listen, listening to understand, you're earning the right for later things in the conversation to happen. That's a beautiful statement. I have to earn my ability to come into a relationship with you further. And if I can even do these things, whether it's a or tell me more, or what else, where
Yes.
I'm really showing an interest in you, and then I get to help even further. And this goes back to what you're talking about, kind of shepherding this idea and listening as a guide to shape something, is I'm kind of coloring in or shading in,
Yes.
adding to kind of the richness of that person's experience in ways that maybe they don't know how to capture. But that really sounds like you were just really despairing. Oh, yeah. Maybe it was because I thought I was angry, but really, I'm really truly sad to a point of despair and hopelessness. Now we open it up, and now they have a much richer story. I love
And
that.
now we're also connected because
Yeah,
now
exactly.
it's I'm in the movie with you instead of
Yeah.
just watching the movie, right? So now I'm
Yeah.
part of the movie and I'm
That's
guiding you
good.
to understand the ending. And a lot of people worry they're going to be wrong when they name an emotion. But
Mhm.
here's what happens. You sound really angry. I'm not angry. I'm just pissed off and blah, blah, blah. Great. You just told me more. Now we're clarifying what
Good.
this really means to you.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, I was frustrated, but what I really was. And then you go, wow, that's amazing to understand on a deeper level.
Yeah.
So it's not about being right. It's about making sure you're trying to understand, not being right. This is not perfection. This is connection.
That's really good. So we've got the map, we've got the 4 stops. What's the third?
So here's what's interesting. I've really honed the language around this and how to share this with people. Most people think they're done listening once they get the story. So I got your facts, I got your feelings, I got the 4 stops, I have the whole story. Good stuff. We got it, right? Now let me start telling. But this is
Right,
one
now
of
it's
the,
my turn.
That was
Right.
my turn. If we
I
get that
punched my
far.
ticket, and now it's my turn.
Yeah, and because we're not told the rest of it. And that's not the hard part because me thinking I got your story is only a figment of my imagination. I don't know if I got you.
Really?
So the only way to know that is to shine a light on what you heard. And so metaphorically, I always say when it's late in the woods, it gets dark, you need a flashlight. Right? You need a flashlight to see. The longer the speaker speaks, the more in the dark they are about what you heard. You've been flashlighting with me this whole time, Graham. You've summarized my story back to me in pieces. And so now I understand what you heard. So we need to be a storyteller when we're a listener. We need to tell a story. I say the powerful story you can tell someone is their own. You tell
Mhm.
me my story, and I like you a lot, Graham. If you do
Absolutely.
that,
Yeah.
right? And so tell the story back to the person, your wife, your partner, your business partner, whomever that is, and that's the flashlight. But only 30 to 90 seconds. Like summarize it, make sure you've gotten it. And then again, most people think they're done. Now they think they're done, but they're not. Because now
Mhm.
we've gathered the story, step one. Now we're understanding the story with the flashlight. So there's 3 tools help us gather. That is the map, the stops, and the compass help us gather the
Gotcha.
story. The flashlight helps us begin to understand the story, but now we got to make sure we got it right.
Yeah.
So how do I know that? Well, I need to ask. So now it's a matter of saying, I just told you your story. Do I get you?
Right.
Do I get you? And then you got to watch for the reaction because people will say yes and mean it. They'll
Mhm.
say yes and then they'll tell you more. Well, they'll say yes and they won't mean it. And this is a common therapy problem, right? It's like, yes, you get me, right? And so you got to listen with your eyes. We say you got to listen with your eyes, ears, and heart. Your
Mhm.
eyes help you watch for what isn't said. And when you ask, do I get you? And you listen with your eyes and you watch for that,
Mhm.
you're going to uncover things that you didn't even know you missed.
You bet. You bet. I like that idea of listening with our eyes because you can see little, a head tilt or an eyes look down or maybe an eyebrow go up, and you get to say, hey, I kind of noticed as I asked, you kind of looked away. Did I miss something? Or did I reflect it back in a wrong way that maybe you'd like me to understand differently or better? What did I miss? And it goes back to what you said earlier. Tell me more.
That's right.
And I'm trying to earn opportunity to be in a relationship with you here in a way that I really want to be, but I can't just say, trust me, but I can jump into it in these kinds of ways with a map and the compass and the flashlight and checking these things out to 4 stops. I'm earning my right, aren't I, to be in
Yes.
relationship with you in a really curious way.
And I always say the words I understand have very little to do with somebody feeling understood. So if you tell me I understand, I go, no, you don't. But if you tell me what I just told you
Yeah.
and ask me if you get me, now we're in a different paradigm. And let me explain the you get me. We call that the water filter, which is the fifth tool. And here's why. Because when you're in the woods, you can't carry enough water. You have to filter the water you collect in the stream or you get sick, right? We don't just drink it out of.
Yeah.
And in the conversation, our own thoughts and feelings contaminate the story. We
Mm.
pollute the story when we're listening. We don't know it. I had this happen with a team member of mine. We were playing a game because we do that to learn about each other and practice. And she said, the story you told me reminded me of a story where somebody died. It happened to me. And I almost went off in my own story because I related to it so much. See, it's not always bad. Sometimes it's that we're connecting. And I wanted to ask you things that had nothing to do with what your story, but had my story. So that's how
Right.
we contaminate it. We
You
have to,
bet.
we have to filter all the contamination out because
Right.
your story is yours. And I don't have to agree with it. It's not about
Yeah.
agreement. It's only about understanding.
From a therapeutic standpoint, those listening that are clinicians would understand this would be kind of a countertransferential piece here where
Yeah.
my own stuff comes into play
Yeah.
and we all have our own stuff. It's not a bad thing, but you're saying if it interferes with, or I see you through my story and I only interpret it through that, I'm missing something and I'm blurring an opportunity to truly get you in a way that could be really, really priceless between us. And
Yeah.
this then brings us also part of the countertransferential pie, if you will, is the role of empathy here, where I am really wanting to understand you in a very unique way. And that empathic piece in this is pretty important, isn't it?
That's very interesting what you said about the countertransference. I hadn't thought about that before. That's a way to filter that out, right? When you make sure that you ask the client or the patient, do I get you? And after doing that. So I like that you emphasize that. And as far as empathy, here's what I would say. Like, I think I'm very opinionated here. So I
Go.
believe that empathy follows listening, not the other way around. I don't think you go in and listen with empathy. I think you learn to be empathetic through listening because a lot of people have a different level of empathy they're coming to the table with. And empathy can mean we fall into sympathy where we join with the feelings rather than putting ourselves in the other person's shoes. So when you use these tools and the process in the same way, then the empathy follows. And we see this all the time. People who didn't think they could relate go, wow, they go up here. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a softening, isn't there, with that understanding? I think oftentimes with if I come in with the attitude of I'm committed to work as best I can, bear with me to listen and to try and get it the way that you experienced it. So
Hmm.
bear with me as I try here. I'm going to be
Yeah.
clumsy and awkward and I'm going to do my best. I'm going to show up as best and fully as I can. And in the process of doing that, understanding creates empathy. I begin to
Yes.
understand, being in your moccasins, all the phrases that we say. But I get it from your standpoint as best I can. Then I check it out and refine it even more and more and more. And I
Hmm.
like the idea too, where you're saying, just by saying, hey, I get it or I got it, doesn't mean you understand. It's almost like silence doesn't equal listening. Saying
Yes.
I got it doesn't mean understanding.
No.
And that's really a key point.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I want to make sure people understand too, because this is we're in a political realm now too, where it's very contentious. And we
Yeah.
know in relationships, we have our own, you're right, I'm wrong. I mean, we're all guilty of it, me included. But so listening isn't about agreement. This has
No.
nothing to do with agreement. So understanding the other person's perspective is different than agreeing with the other person's perspective. I had a client who was like grappling with this, and he's like, what if somebody came to me and was in the Ku Klux Klan? And I vehemently am opposed to that. I go, but you can try to understand where their beliefs come from, what's going on. Doesn't mean you're endorsing it, supporting it, or otherwise, but start there before you try to help the pivot.
I heard the
Yeah.
most wonderful story around that very topic recently. I think it was on NPR. This Black woman, very well known. I can't remember her name, forgive me. But the story is what you just said right there. She became friends with an ex-Klansman, and
Hmm.
they became friends by a shared understanding. And what she learned, this guy was in prison. What she learned was this guy got indoctrinated very, very early on.
Yeah.
And he didn't know what was he was being infiltrated with emotionally and otherwise. And he
Sure.
became to understand himself through her gentle and loving. The thing was, one of her family members was killed by the Klan.
Wow.
But they developed this and he began to make this beautiful change in himself. He was in prison, but nonetheless, just attitudinally came in
Yeah.
to understand things deeper by her gentleness And she had to harness the very things you're talking about right now that help him see some things maybe that he didn't understand before. But what a transformation that could be. Let's talk about that actually. What are some of the takeaways from being able to listen and areas where we can grow individually by being listened to, personally by being a better listener, and maybe even relationally? What are some of the takeaways around that?
Let's start in business. It's just so interesting to watch people practice this with each other. I mean, we've had people that know each other, have worked together for 20 years, and they're like, I didn't know that about that person. It's like, you've been
That's so
over the
good.
other side of the cube, right?
Right.
So it's just, again, if we only have 3 words for emotional language, how much are we actually asking in a real conversation? How deep are we, how are we really peeling any layers back to really understand one another in a different way? So it creates so much engagement and so much enrichment in the relationship. It's like you're in the car and you want to flip somebody the bird because they cut you off. And then you talk to that person and realize they just lost their wife or they had
Yes,
got a cancer diagnosis. You're not flipping them the bird anymore. So you may want to in that
exactly.
moment, but it's so when we humanize people, it changes how we work together. And just a little bit of listening does that. So that's one way. The other way is obviously with spouses. I mean, there's a closeness bias. The more we're with somebody, the more we think we should know them and already understand them. And I often say, like, I live in Philly. I don't go to the Liberty Bell anymore. I've seen it a few times. I'm not curious about it. So the more
Very
we
good.
know somebody, the less curious we become,
Good analogy.
ironically,
Yeah,
not
it's a good
more
analogy.
curious. So how do we maintain energy in the relationship? Well, if we're curious when we listen, about our days and don't try to solve problems and just create moments of these understanding, it profoundly changes the relationship. It doesn't take a lot to fix what's broken often. It just
Really
takes
good.
moments. Yeah.
So I want to talk about how folks can get in touch with you after this and learn more about what you're doing, both personally and as an organization. But you've got something coming out, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, bringing this not just to organizations and to other places where you're bringing it, but also into the classroom. Tell us about that.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. I'm so excited. Maybe because adults are frustrating. I don't know. It's all good. I don't. Do you want to learn to ski at 5 or 45? Like, I don't want to teach the 45-year-old who's scared and frightened, and I've already been doing it this way. I don't know how to do it.
Right.
It's great. I love watching adults transform, actually, but it's hard because
It
they
is
have bad
hard.
habits.
Yeah.
And so 85% of what we learn is through listening, and it's the only
Yes.
skill that we don't teach.
Mm.
So what we've done is we've created a program for 3rd to 5th graders. So, and teachers have enough to do. They are so burdened and so just mired in curriculum. So we've made this as simple and plug and play as possible. So animated Christine comes into the classroom
Nice.
and into the woods and through 11 video lessons and teaches the tools while the teachers are the heroes because they get to use the tools in the classroom to help create a language of listening. We give
So
them
good.
everything they need and it's fun and it's playful and hopefully it's going to change the world. That's what we hope for.
Congratulations on that. I can't see why it wouldn't. If
Yeah.
85% of what we learn and take away is through our listening. Do you have out of curiosity, do you have a one for the parents as well?
When your child in 3rd to 5th grade goes through this, you get a caregiver guide as well as
So
how to use this in the class at home. So you're going
yeah,
on so the kids get a listening path passport. They get every time they go on a listening adventure, they get a sticker in their passport. They
nice.
get something to take home with their parents so they can understand about it too. And my book tells the story of the first 6 tools on the listening path. So that's another way they can get indoctrinated. And then, of course, if we come into your organization, there's a lot of overlap there. So yeah.
Really good. We've talked about so many things today, and it's been it's always fun to be with you. But if there's one thing our listeners could do today, just one little pithy distilled piece, what could they do today to be a better listener? One thing.
The first thing you have to do is be willing to. It's like the joke. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Just
You
one.
gotta
They have to be willing to change.
remember the
So
change.
realize it's a skill. It's diet and exercise, whatever. We know the things we have to do, even if you just do one thing. So
Yeah,
that's the first part. But just add tell me more. If that's all you do, add
tell
tell
me
me
more.
more. Because tell me more is just the opener, the gateway to giving people permission. And then, that changes a lot. Just that.
I really like that. That's an easy one. Just tell me more.
Tell
Oh,
me more.
okay. I will.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good. Well, hey, tell me more about where people can learn more about you and your book. What's it costing you not to listen? And just following up on all that we've talked about today, how can they get a hold of you?
So they can go to thelisteningpath.com. And we're about to launch our new website. You go in, you're a business or you're an educator, it'll take you on the right path. So everything you need will be there. And my book is on all the major outlets and Amazon and any form you like, Kindle, audio, hardback, softback. So everybody, people like books like they like their sneakers. I want it to fit me the way I want it to fit me. So whatever you need, we
You
have it
bet.
for you. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Christine, it's been great to have you back today. Thanks for being a part of our clinician series today. It's always a joy to talk with you, and I'm so happy around the things that you're doing, the ways that people are going to be benefiting. And I know you benefited us by allowing us to listen to you today and our listeners as well. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Graham. I appreciate it.
I also want to thank you, our listeners, for dropping by and joining Christine and me today. It's always great to have you with us. Regarding our episode today, I want to remind you that it and its resources and all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. Thanks again for being with us on the show. And we'll look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.